A janitor fixed what an entire engineering team couldn't, but what happened next shocked the CEO. You ever seen someone doing something they weren't supposed to be good at, and they were brilliant at it anyway? That's what happened on a random Tuesday night in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was almost 9 p.m. when Calvin Rhodes pushed open the heavy metal door that led into the old storeroom behind the logistics bay at Braylock Industries. He was still in his uniform, dark gray coveralls with maintenance stitched over the chest, but the sleeves were rolled up, and his face had that tired but focused look, the kind you see on someone who's working not because they have to, but because they want to. The building was quiet now. Most of the staff had been gone for hours. The only sounds came from a half-broken vending machine near the break room and a flickering light that stubbornly refused to stay off. Calvin made his way past shelves of dusty parts, stacks of old monitors, and bins full of tangled wires. This place wasn't pretty, but it was where he came to think. In the back corner of the room sat a beat-up sorting unit 7X, a key piece of equipment for the warehouse. It had stopped working months ago, written off by the engineers as more trouble than it's worth. It wasn't Calvin's job to fix it, but for the past few weeks, he'd been slowly chipping away at it after hours. He had no manuals, no help, and no real reason to care. But Calvin liked broken things, always had. As a kid, he used to take apart old radios, VCRs, even lawnmowers, just to see if he could get them running again. Most kids grew out of that phase. Calvin didn't. He laid out his tools like a surgeon: socket wrench, voltmeter, soldering pen, small LED flashlight. Beside him was a flattened cardboard box where he'd scribbled a rough schematic in pencil. Circles, arrows, notes. The kind of thing no one but him would understand. He slid under the machine and got to work. "Come on," he muttered, gently adjusting a coil. "I know you got more in you." The machine let out a soft grind, then nothing. He didn't flinch, just smiled. "You're stubborn. I like that." Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Miles Henley, Braylock's CEO, had just returned from a dinner meeting. He'd left his laptop on his desk, something he never did, and came back alone to grab it before his early flight the next morning. As he walked past the storeroom, he noticed something strange. The door was cracked open, and there was light spilling out. He paused. He figured it was security or one of the cleaning crew, but then he heard something. A whirring. Not the usual kind. This was mechanical, rhythmic. Curious, he stepped closer, quiet, cautious, and that's when he saw it. Through the open doorway, barely visible behind a tall shelving unit, he saw Calvin, kneeling next to the sorting machine, focused, calm, hands moving with confidence, not guessing, knowing. Then the machine jerked, once, twice, then it started moving. Slowly at first, then smoother. The arm lifted apart, scanned it, sorted it correctly, dropped it into the bin. Then it did it again, and again. Miles blinked. That thing was supposed to be dead. And this guy in a maintenance uniform, he brought it back? He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He was stunned. But something told him this was more than a fluke, and he needed to see what else this man could do. Miles stayed in the doorway longer than he meant to. Something about the scene in front of him felt out of place. Not wrong, just unexpected. Calvin didn't notice him at first. He was too deep into it, eyes moving between the flashing indicator lights and the control panel he'd rigged up using an old circuit board and a cracked tablet screen. "All right," Calvin muttered under his breath. "Voltage is steady. Let's see how you handle real-time sequencing." He tapped a wire into place with the back of a screwdriver, then flipped a switch. The machine rattled again, louder this time. The small robotic arm picked up another package and sorted it cleanly, then another, then 3 at once. It was faster, smarter. The pauses were gone. Miles let out a breath. Calvin looked up. He froze. They made eye contact. 1 beat, 2. "Mr. Henley?" Calvin's voice came out slower than usual, like he wasn't sure if this was real. Miles took a few steps into the room. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." Calvin stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. His posture stiffened. "Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to break any protocols. I just thought..." "You fixed that?" Miles pointed at the unit. "That sorting system?" Calvin hesitated. "Yes, sir. Been working on it for a while now. Just Off the clock. Miles narrowed his eyes, but not in anger. And it's working? Calvin nodded. Mostly. Still a couple bugs in the scan timing, but the motor's clean. I rewired the main board and bypassed the fried controller. Took some parts from the return shelf. Hope that's all right. Miles stepped closer, studying the machine. Engineering said it was unfixable, he said quietly. I guess they didn't want to bother with it. Silence. You an engineer, Rhodes? Calvin shook his head. No, sir, not on paper. Miles looked at him, really looked. The calloused hands, the worn-down boots, the precision in the way everything was laid out. Where'd you learn to do this? Calvin glanced at the floor, like the answer might be hiding in the cracks. Had a scholarship to Purdue, electrical engineering. 3 years in, my dad got sick. Bills piled up. I left school, took whatever work I could find. You never went back? Thought about it. Life got busy. People stopped asking. After a while, I stopped telling. Miles didn't speak. He just stared at the machine, watching it work. Click, scan, sort, drop. It was faster than the new model the company had ordered last month. He turned back to Calvin. You know, there's a lot of people in this company who would have walked past this thing 100 times and never touched it. Calvin shrugged. I don't like throwing things out if they still got life in them. Miles smiled at that, just a little. You mind if I show this to the engineering team tomorrow? Calvin's eyes widened. I mean, sure. I don't know what they'll think. We'll find out, Miles said, already pulling out his phone. You here at 8 a.m.? I'm usually on shift at 7. Good. I'll have someone cover your route. Meet me in the 5th floor conference room first thing. Calvin looked like he wanted to ask more, but couldn't find the words. Miles took one last glance at the machine, then turned to leave. He paused at the door. Rhodes? Sir? Nice work. But as the door closed behind him, Calvin didn't smile. He just stood there, staring at the machine, wondering what he'd just started. Calvin didn't sleep much that night. He lay on his worn mattress in his small one-bedroom apartment off Jefferson Boulevard, staring at the ceiling, going over every detail of the conversation with Miles. His mind raced, replaying the CEO's face, his tone, the way he looked at that machine, not like it was a surprise, but like he'd seen something important. Calvin didn't know whether that was a good thing or not. The next morning, he was up before sunrise. He ironed his uniform twice, polished his boots, even trimmed his beard with shaky hands. At 6:55 a.m., he was already waiting in his truck outside Braylock's main entrance. The usual crew filtered in, warehouse staff with coffee cups, office workers glued to their phones, mid-level managers walking fast to seem important. None of them noticed him sitting there, just like every other day. But today wasn't like every other day. At 8:01, Calvin stood at the glass doors of the 5th floor conference room. He looked out of place, still in his coveralls, surrounded by people in polos and slacks, some already seated, flipping through notes. When Miles walked in, the room quieted. He didn't wait for introductions. This is Calvin Rhodes, he said. He's not on the engineering team. He works in maintenance. But last night, he brought a piece of equipment back online that this department declared unrepairable 3 months ago. The engineers exchanged glances. Miles looked over at Calvin. Tell them what you did. Calvin cleared his throat. Well, the 7X sorter had a blown capacitor, fried board, and the main scan sensor was misaligned. The diagnostic software was outdated, so I rebuilt a basic interface using some old tablets, rewired the primary harness, remapped the control flow. He glanced around. The room was still. People listened, but nobody believed him yet. One engineer spoke up. You used the return shelf parts? Yes, sir. Alone? Calvin nodded. After my shift, just a little bit at a time. Another guy leaned forward. That unit's not just broken, it's obsolete. Why bother fixing it? Calvin shrugged. Obsolete don't mean useless, just means nobody tried hard enough yet. That hung in the air. Miles gestured to the TV screen at the end of the room. I had someone film it this morning here. He hit play. The room went silent again. On screen, the machine worked flawlessly, scanning, sorting, completing tasks faster than its replacement model. People sat up straighter. One engineer actually took notes. When the video ended, Miles turned back to the room. I want every one of you to spend the next hour talking to Mr. Rhodes. Ask questions. Understand what he did. Then I want a recommendation. what we can learn from this, and how to apply it across the floor. He looked at Calvin. You good with that? Calvin's voice was quiet, but steady. Yes, sir. And for the first time since walking in, he let himself smile. Just a little. But not everyone in that room was ready to clap for a man in coveralls, and one of them was already planning to prove Calvin didn't belong. The hour that followed felt like a whirlwind. People who had never said more than good morning to Calvin now surrounded him with notepads and questions. Some were curious, others skeptical. A few just wanted to poke holes in what he did. A short, sharp-tongued guy named Trevor Bain, one of the senior systems engineers, spoke the loudest. So wait, you're telling me you rerouted a triple-channel relay with, spare parts from the recycling bin? Calvin nodded calmly. And a little copper wire I stripped from an old floor fan. Trevor smirked like he'd caught a lie. That's not even in the manual. I know. That's why I didn't use the manual. A couple of the younger engineers chuckled, but Trevor wasn't laughing. And where exactly did you learn any of this? Calvin didn't blink. I told Mr. Henley yesterday I studied electrical engineering at Purdue, made it to my junior year. Trevor folded his arms. But no degree, no credentials, no certifications? No, sir. And yet you think you can teach us something? That one stung. Calvin took a breath, steady and controlled. I'm not here to teach anybody anything, he said. I just saw something broken and fixed it. That's all. Miles, who had been quiet for a few minutes, finally stood up. Trevor, are you saying we should ignore someone's talent because they didn't take the right path? Trevor shifted in his seat. I'm saying we can't build an engineering strategy around one guy with no formal training. Miles raised an eyebrow. That one guy fixed the system none of you could, in his spare time, with no team, no tools, and no budget. Trevor opened his mouth to reply, but Miles cut him off. This isn't about titles anymore. It's about results. The room fell quiet again. Then a soft voice from the corner broke the tension. He rewired the signal pathways to run cleaner than factory spec, said Elise Tran, a young software engineer. I checked it myself. It's not just fixed. It's better. Calvin glanced at her, surprised. She gave him a small nod. I've been here 2 years. I've never seen anyone do what you did. Miles smiled. That's what I wanted to hear. He turned back to Calvin. How'd you feel about spending a few weeks with our team upstairs? Just a trial period. Learn some systems, share some ideas, see where it goes. Calvin hesitated. He wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. I mean, I'd still be on maintenance? No, Miles said. I'd put you on special assignment, directly under me. Calvin glanced around the room. Trevor looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. Elise gave him a quiet thumbs up. You'd be giving me a shot? I'm giving us a shot, Miles said. We need people like you. People who see potential in things everyone else overlooks. Calvin finally nodded. All right, let's see what happens. But as he walked out of that room, badge still reading maintenance, he knew this wasn't just a promotion. It was a test. And not everyone wanted to see him pass. The following Monday, Calvin showed up on the 5th floor. This time, not in coveralls. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, khakis, and borrowed dress shoes that were a half size too tight. But he didn't complain. He carried a plain black notebook and a pen with no cap, no laptop, no fancy gear, just him. The engineering team didn't roll out the red carpet. Some nodded politely. A few avoided eye contact. Trevor didn't speak at all. Miles had given Calvin an empty desk and an open invite to sit in on team meetings. He wasn't expected to lead, just observe, learn, contribute when he could. By Wednesday, Elise had started asking him for input. By Friday, he was sketching wiring diagrams on the whiteboard in the break room. People began to notice his handwriting, tight, fast, almost artistic. One afternoon, while troubleshooting a faulty conveyor alignment script, Calvin quietly rewrote a section of code that had been throwing errors for weeks. He didn't announce it, just taped a note to the monitor. Try this version. Might run cleaner. It did, and faster. That's when the shift began. The whispers around the office turned from maintenance guy to who is this guy? But Trevor wasn't done. He started picking apart Calvin's notes during meetings. Subtle digs, comments disguised as feedback. You sure that's the best way to approach a voltage drop? Interesting idea. but probably not practical. Rhodes, can you remind us what textbook that method came from? Calvin never fired back. He just listened, adjusted when needed, and kept showing up. One Thursday morning, Miles called a full department meeting. Everyone assumed it was about the new scanner rollout. It wasn't. Instead, he rolled out a side-by-side comparison, 2 sorting systems, one standard, one Calvin's rebuild. The room watched the footage in silence. Calvin's version sorted nearly double the volume. Fewer errors, less downtime. Then Miles turned to the group. 3 months ago, this machine was considered scrap. Now it's our new internal benchmark. He clicked to the next slide. Internal systems efficiency upgrade, lead C Rhodes. Gasps. A few scattered claps, then silence. Trevor raised his hand. Respectfully, Miles, don't you think this is moving a little fast? I mean, we still don't know what his long-term capabilities are. Miles didn't hesitate. I do. I've seen it. He looked around the room. I've learned something these past few weeks. Sometimes, brilliance doesn't come in a suit. It doesn't always have a diploma behind it. And if we wait for someone to hand us their credentials before we listen, we'll miss the ones who've been teaching themselves under fluorescent lights and behind mop buckets for years. People looked at Calvin, really looked. Miles continued, if anyone in this room has a better system ready to deploy, speak up. Silence. Trevor didn't move. Then Elise raised her voice. He earned that lead spot, period. Others murmured agreement. Calvin stood awkwardly, not sure what to say. Miles turned to him. You good with the assignment? Calvin cleared his throat. Yes, sir, I've got some ideas already. Trevor finally spoke, but this time quieter. Guess I'll be reporting to you now, huh? Calvin gave a half smile. Nah, we're all building the same thing. Far as I'm concerned, we're teammates. But deep down, Calvin knew this wasn't about titles or revenge. It was about showing what someone can do when the world stops underestimating them. 2 weeks into the new role, Calvin's life looked different. He still lived in the same apartment, still drove the same beat-up Ford Ranger with the squeaky belt, and still fixed his own plumbing when the sink leaked. But something had shifted. The way people looked at him, the way they spoke to him, the way they listened. One morning, he walked into the office and found a fresh badge on his desk. Calvin Rhodes, Systems Development Lead Tech. He didn't ask for it, didn't expect it. He just stared at it for a long time before quietly clipping it to his shirt. He spent his days drawing out redesigns, proposing hardware adjustments, even mentoring interns on how to strip and repurpose outdated tech. His office was still more cluttered than the rest. Old fans, busted remotes, extra wiring. And yet, somehow, it felt like the nerve center of the whole floor. He didn't brag, didn't boast. But word had spread, across departments, through break rooms, all the way down to the janitorial staff, who now gave him a knowing nod when they passed. Make us proud, Cal, one of the nighttime security guards said one evening. But the biggest change? He started believing it himself. Still, not everything was smooth. The pressure was heavier now. There were deadlines, expectations. Higher-ups from corporate started visiting, asking questions, sitting in on meetings with stiff faces and stiff suits. One of them, a man from the Cincinnati division named Derek Flanagan, pulled Miles aside after a demo. You're telling me a former janitor is leading your most sensitive upgrade rollout? Miles didn't flinch. No, I'm telling you our most capable team member is leading it. Derek scoffed. What happens when it falls apart? Then we fix it, like he's been doing since the day we met. Back in his workspace, Calvin could feel the eyes, people checking his diagrams, double-checking his specs, waiting, and it started to get to him. One night, long after most had left, he sat at his desk, shoulders hunched, staring at the redesign he'd been working on for days. Nothing was clicking. He rubbed his eyes. He felt out of place again. The old voice in his head started whispering, "You're not supposed to be here." He stood, about to pack it in, when someone knocked softly on the door. It was Elise. "You all right?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." She walked in, pulled up a chair, and sat across from him. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Sure." "That first week you joined us? I went home every night thinking I wasn't good enough to keep up." He looked at her, surprised. "I mean it," she continued. "You saw things we missed. did things I didn't think were possible, and you never made any of us feel small for it. Calvin looked down. Some days, I don't know if I'm fooling everyone or just fooling myself. You're not, she said. You belong here. You've always belonged here. We're just lucky we finally noticed. He smiled just a little. Then he turned back to the schematic. Something clicked. Wait a second. Elise leaned in as he grabbed a pencil and started sketching a new line across the diagram. His hand moved faster, more confident. That's it, he said. That's the missing link. She grinned. Told you. But even as the solution came together, neither of them knew how far this moment would ripple. Not just through the company, but through every unseen person quietly holding the world together behind the scenes. A month later, the new system went live, not just in Fort Wayne, but across all 5 Braylock distribution centers. Calvin's design didn't just outperform expectations, it reset the company's standard operating procedures. Efficiency jumped, downtime dropped, and suddenly the name Calvin Rhodes showed up in internal memos, logistics reports, and, most shockingly to him, a corporate newsletter. He read that line 5 times before it sank in. Calvin Rhodes, lead technician, spearheaded the design of our new adaptive sort system, built entirely from recycled tech and ingenuity. No titles before his name, no degrees after it, just the truth. He didn't celebrate with a big speech or a party. He didn't want any of that. Instead, after the rollout, Calvin took a quiet walk back to the old storeroom where it all started. The lights flickered, same as always. The vending machine still made that weird sound when it ran. But now, there was a new nameplate on the sorting unit. Refit and restored by C. Rhodes, Feb 2025. He stood there, just looking. That's when Miles showed up behind him. They wanted to move this down to the training center, Miles said. I told them to leave it here. Not everything needs to be polished to be important. Calvin nodded. Didn't expect all this, you know. I didn't expect to be taught a lesson by a guy fixing machines after hours, but here we are. They stood there for a moment, the air quiet between them. You changed how this place thinks, Miles said. About people, about assumptions, about potential. Calvin didn't know what to say to that. I just wanted to make something work, he said. And you did, Miles replied. But more than that, you reminded us that talent doesn't always walk in wearing a tie. Miles started to leave, then paused. You ever think about finishing your degree? Calvin looked at him and smiled. I don't need a paper to tell me I'm good at something. Miles smiled back. No, but if you ever want it, we'll pay for it. They shook hands, not out of formality, but out of mutual respect. As the CEO walked away, Calvin stayed for a bit longer. In that cluttered little room, surrounded by parts nobody else wanted, he'd built more than a machine. He'd built belief. In himself, in others like him, in the idea that sometimes the most overlooked people are the ones holding the solutions the world desperately needs. If you're watching this thinking you don't look like the right person or don't come from the right place, remember, Calvin, your value isn't measured by where you start. It's measured by what you do when no one's watching. So keep building, keep showing up, keep proving them wrong until they stop asking if you belong and start wondering how they ever got by without you, because somebody's always watching. Make it count.